Um, excuse the red face. I'm on like SSRI withdrawals, so I've just been crying at everything, including possibly at this essay. We'll see. But anyway, when I was in high school, I read Hamlet, I watched it, and I did cry about that at the time, for sure, I think. I imagine. That movie with that guy with he dyed his hair, the British guy, is really good. Um, anyway, I spent like 3 months writing this whole, it's just an outline, like, I didn't even make it a proper essay, like this presentation. Um, I spent 3 months writing it, changed my brain chemistry. I was very honest with myself in the writing of it, so it ended up being like not as preachy and axiomatic as normally I was back then. So it kind of still holds up, and it's fun. So I want to read it. I'm surprised I have never done because this is honestly something that I don't know. Like yeah, like it's decent. Um, but like it was stressful for me at the time. But it was also fun because like I was reading, all the different commentary, and bro, the amount of different opinions people have about Hamlet. And they all thought they were right, and they were all these, like, old British men, like, having beef with each other over over this fake little guy. It was kind of hilarious. Um, but yeah. I feel like the final essay that I got here also is similar to the one that I did on Alice in Wonderland. So I'll probably read that one next. It's interesting because like the stuff that I wrote in these essays is kind of like stuff that I sort of needed to hear back then or grasp back then. Not that I did grasp it, but it's ended up being prophetic. A lot of my writing has ended up being prophetic and kind of pre or like oh god, what's the word? Like expressed beforehand. Stuff that then happened like later. I mean that's literally what prophetic means. What am I saying? It contains a perspective that only later did I fully come into. Anyway, this is not, again, I haven't reread this. Some of this stuff is obviously like pretty like I wrote it years ago and I am a completely different person and believe totally different things now. But yeah. So like grain of salt and all that. Yeah, introduction. Who is Hamlet? Why does he do what he does or not do what he doesn't? Was his final choice right? Um Hamlet spoilers. His final choice being to just screw all of the, indecision and just kill his uncle, like his ghost guy told him to. These questions have perplexed everyone who scrutinizes this observed of all observers. As John Gielgud points out, Hamlet's mind is like quicksilver. He leaps from high philosophy to low comedy, from despair to levity to black humor, from moral tenderness to apparent callousness. However, his one definite characteristic is an intense and sensitive consciousness of himself and the world around him. Wait, I have a poem I want to read after this. Okay. Wait, maybe I should read the poem first. No, I'll read it after, because I never know what to do for an outro. Anyway, consciousness. The visit of the ghost expands his consciousness further, unveiling hints of people's inner hearts and of the afterlife. Hamlet's story echoes Adam and Eve's with its imagery of poison, corrupted gardens, and brothers fighting. As Adam's eating the apple thrust him from innocence to irreversible knowledge of good and evil, so the ghost's conversation with Hamlet drives him further from innocence into thoughts beyond the reaches of his soul. And as it was for Adam, Hamlet's knowledge ends up being only of evil and it spirals inevitably into death. Hamlet looks beyond the seeming. So that's the theme through the whole play, is this idea of seeming and masks and plays and veils and stuff. So he looks beyond that into truths about human mortality and providence, about the corruption of earth and the incomprehensibility of heaven, but only ever like the negative, venomous side of these. And ironically, these deep and ugly truths are only conveyed by messengers under a disguise of seeming. The ghost has the appearance and armor of Hamlet's father, and hints at more horrible things he could tell. Ophelia turns the horrible events of her life into favor and prettiness by flowers when she is genuinely mad, and Hamlet rips apart the favor and prettiness of Claudius and Polonius's seeming, undercover feigned madness, and with a play. Seeming and acting, as well as poison and disease, thus define the imagery of the play. Right? So, like these truths about the unveiling of things, of the naked, ugly truth beneath, happens through artifice. Two, corruption of earth. In his piercing examination of humanity, Hamlet only sees the extent of humanity's fallenness. He finds no good in other people by teasing out their natures. His uncle is lustful and murderous, his mother fickle, his schoolmates miniature snakes to Claudius's viper, Polonius foolish, Ophelia a beautiful, heartless pawn. To him, this cancels out the glory of God's image in humanity and the reflections of God in all of creation. Disease, death, and decay permeate the play's imagery. Sorry, I just, too much horror and vampires lately. I'm like, oh, okay. Um, for Hamlet, looking past smiles and makeup, we are wretched creatures crawling, not quite spiritually ascended in heaven, and not quite dead under the earth. Mood. And looking past nature's beauty, the earth is a pestilential congregation of vapors. As it were, Hamlet transcends the transcendentals of goodness, truth, and beauty. He is the anguished first half of a psalm, Solomon's disillusioned cry in Ecclesiastes. He has seen through it all. The wicked flourish, earth turns round, and we all die. What is the meaning? And this is a little bit from me in my time. In the play's world of mystery and darkness, Hamlet can never peer far enough to see that he's only transcended false images of goodness, truth, and beauty, and that there is the God of justice above and behind the fallen world. Depending on when you ask me, I will or will not co-sign to that statement. But yeah, I think there is an idea of Hamlet kind of getting beyond the veil to the ugly truth, but not quite getting beyond the ugly, solid, truth to like sort of the transcendence that's like can be felt sometimes beyond that. But then, the thing is that then you go back down and like you if you go and you pierce through everything and you transcend and you're like, oh, I'm one with everything, then you have to go, like do the dishes. So so there's a place for it. It's not about just getting all the knowledge, but like experience and going back into the world. And I'm spoiling the kind of conclusion of the play, but what Hamlet finally does, where he gets this kind of transcendent glimpse, and then he immediately does the imperfect action that he was going to do the whole time. He does it. He can see through it. He can see all the way through it, but he still got to do it. 100% commit himself. Yeah. So yes, corruption of earth. 3, mortality of acting. Hamlet's knowledge, get it? Acting. Hamlet's knowledge burdens him not only with sorrow, but with a responsibility to act. But I guess it's kind of like that. Like, he goes in layers, right? Like, first, because he's, like, piercing the veil, so to speak. So at first he's like, oh, shit, like, my uncle's a murderer, then I have to kill him. But then he continues to think, and he's like, is that ghost even my father? Was it real? If I kill him, bad things are gonna happen. Should I kill him? Maybe he has some sort of genre awareness that revenge only breeds revenge and it's just gonna be bloody, etc. So then, the further veil, then he's like, well, I don't want to act at all. And he just keeps stacking up and up and up, of like, yeah, thought and action, revelation and action. Anyway, yeah, so his knowledge does burden him, initially with this responsibility to act, and throughout the whole play. Claudius is a smiling villain, and Hamlet has been told to kill Claudius. Here is where we see the seeming and acting. Acting can be acting in a play and taking action. These intertwine dizzyingly as Hamlet puts on an antic disposition, puts on a play within the play, puts on the mindset of a revenger, all to communicate the ugly inner truth he's seen and to avoid or to further this action he's supposed to take of killing his uncle. See, because for better or for worse, something in him resists revenge. He cannot sweep to action on the wings of his initial horror. And puzzling over whether Hamlet should or should not have revenged is somewhat beside the heart of his soliloquies and his acting. I think that was me kind of being slightly salty at a bunch of the essays that are like, should Hamlet have done it? because there was a lot of those on both sides. There was one that was like, Hamlet's the villain here. Claudius is actually a decent guy, and Hamlet was actually bad. Like, he's trying to defend him. There's all sorts. Anyway, um, yeah, puzzling over whether he should or should not have. It's kind of like, okay. To be fair, though, he did do a lot of that himself. Hamlet doesn't just consider, though, but this is why, because Hamlet doesn't just consider his particular morbid situation. Because there's people that were pointing out, like, it's a revenge play, and, like, in revenge, in this situation, revenge breeds revenge, and it's all just an evil, ugly cycle, so he just should have not done it, or something like that. But the thing is that we see in the poetry of Hamlet's paradoxes a wider view of struggling humanity, of what such fellows as we are to do, crawling between heaven and earth in general. Shakespeare fills the inherited structure of the revenge tragedy with the truest and deepest enigmas of being human. There's a citation for that. Hamlet concerns the springs of all our actions. An action may come from reason or from passion, and Hamlet increasingly sees that human reason is fallible and often fails to browbeat the will into action, and human passion, like everything human, inevitably declines with time. And also, too much reason, and you can never act. Because again, he can kind of see that this thing he's going to do, it's not perfect. He doesn't know, even for sure, whether that ghost really was his father. He's not certain that Claudius is guilty. Even if he is, that's a very dark action that he's going to take, and it'll just upend, like, more chaos and stuff. Yeah. So too much reason, you can never act. Too much passion, you act rashly. Stabby, stabby, curtain, yeah. In addition, again, the world and everyone in it is so corrupt that our every action is worthy of disgust and is kind of like tied up in all these systems of corruption, right? Like, you really can't act in the world without the butterfly effect, meaning that you are causing some sort of harm. So the consequence for the plot of Hamlet kind of realizing all this is that Hamlet... What? 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 Why am I bringing Paul into this? No? Okay, I'm gonna skip that part. No, well, I was making a comparison between Paul as, like, that which I would, I do not, the evil which I would not, that I do. Yeah. So I guess there is sort of a parallel. Like, he definitely isn't in full control of his actions there. And again, he's crawling between earth and heaven. He can never see little enough of the grand scheme of things to easily just act like Claudius and just be vibing, or enough to somehow escape the corruption, escape the revenge cycle, and take some sort of perfect good action. Again, such a mood. Wonder I love this so much. I've been thinking about Hamlet like nonstop since I wrote this. Yeah, it's definitely a mood for so many reasons. Anyway, Hamlet, yeah, he's burdened with knowledge of the corrupt world in which he acts, and he's burdened in the whole perplexing mechanics of human action itself, and he ends up paralyzingly self-conscious. He's like a player or an actor who's overacting, thinking about the script and the costumes and the stage. Also, given the poisonous nature of all the knowledge of good and evil over which Hamlet broods, whatever actions or acting he finally performs can hardly be healing. Well, okay, this part's a little moralistic, but true, it's very negative, right? The entirety that he's exposed to is pretty negative. He sees through the feeble falsity of human goodness and human love, so he can't use that, and he doesn't have a wellspring of divine or transcendent love to act from either. It's very much from beneath type deal. Everything that Hamlet's being given to deal with. Number 4 is, so we have the corruption of earth, the mortality of human acting, and fate. Number 4. Human actions and motivation are time-bound, flawed, and chancy. Most of Hamlet's major actions come out by accident as well. The arrival of the players, so actors, Polonius behind the curtain, the discovery of the death letter. But in these unpredictable happenings, Hamlet hears his fate cry out. So in these unpredictable happenings, Hamlet hears his fate cry out. As he sees it, his place in a wider story is to set right the times that are out of joint. He has been ordered, by a force he considers compelling and justified, to take revenge on Claudius. In a sense, his life has passed out of his hands. He's lost himself. He's given up all of his past life, including the love of his life, Ophelia, in order to remember, remember, remember. He's become an agent of the ghost and possibly an agent of heaven. Um, yeah, my friend I was talking to her about Hamlet, and she said, like, for the whole play, he's more dead than the ghost. He's more dead than his father. Anyway, his life out of his hands. And yet he's not a marionette. Hamlet Sr. is dead, and according to the ghost, heaven will not move directly to punish Claudius, so Hamlet has to take action himself, most notably to kill Claudius or choose not to. Although, for him, choosing not to is evidently not really an option. There's no way out of the revenge plot once you're in. Hamlet is the only free moral agent in the picture, yet how free is he when this is apparently his inescapable fate, and so many of his actions are qualified by time and accident, and he's not really even in control of those actions that he does take. For instance, he's finally like, okay, stabby stabby, and he ends up stabby stabby the wrong guy. Yeah. All of us, like Hamlet, are free moral agents. But we came to our current kind of free will by, the knowledge of good and evil type thing, so it's very much an imperfect thing. And yet the only way to get through it is to engage with it, but you know that it's kind of sketchy. We passed from innocence to being as gods, or, to use Hamlet's words, in apprehension like a god. Now, the forces acting in this world are us, in apprehension like a god, carrying this knowledge that's really beyond the reaches of our soul. And then, depending on how you see it, some sort of divine providence above it all, maybe, but yeah. Hamlet, because Hamlet feels this tension, especially since if there is kind of in the play, there's no, there's no deus ex machina that, comes down and, solves everything. It's all, any kind of transcendence is very much behind the shadows, and he just feels this tension of being imperfect, being human, and carrying this knowledge that you can't even handle, but having to act, having to do something. There's a mysterious god or fate or heaven or providence behind the scenes, that's kind of influencing or subsuming humanity's will. And you could also talk about this, because this would be like the ghost or heaven or whatever, like outside forces, outside powerful forces, and kind of fate and all of that. It could be in a sense of religion or just in a sense of forces outside us. And yet, so there's those forces, and then yet on the stage of time, humanity has a mortal and limited sphere of influence within which we can make decisions that seem dizzyingly important and that drag an endless chain of consequences. In addition to this, Hamlet has an ethical problem within that sphere of his influence. Apparently, Providence has him playing the role of revenger, but can he do that ethically? Can eternity's absolute standards of good and evil be carried out on the earth, and should they be? And then he's just completely overwhelmed with horror at the corruption permeating the dilemma and permeating the world in which all of this is played out. Basically, he is more conscious than others in the play of the wider picture, the subtle relation between Providence's inexorable will and fateful accidents, and people's ephemeral will and acting. The subtle relation between Providence's inexorable will and, depending on whether you believe in fate, and faithful accidents and people's ephemeral will and acting. Yeah, pretty much. Indeed, the play does compass heaven and earth, and shall we couple hell? The only conclusion that Hamlet is ever able to draw is that it is his fate to kill Claudius and to set right his poisoned country. In Acts 1 through 4, Hamlet seizes on this burden and gives himself up to it whether he likes it or not. Yet he does hate it. He says, "O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right." And he takes more upon himself. He tries to pry further into the hearts of people. He fights for control even for things over which he has no jurisdiction. More thoughts beyond the reaches of his soul, just to try to get out of this or to do it better. He needs to gather all the evidence with his play and his testing madness, and he busies himself to make sure Claudius goes to hell, like he thinks Claudius should. And once again, he's obsessed by corruption, so this busyness of his tends toward the bad and destructive. He's horrified by it, but it also has control of him, too. Now, also, it is categorically impossible to delineate the exact conflict going on in Hamlet's mind, because many old British men have tried and yelled at each other about it. Shakespeare didn't want us to, or he would have told us. However, we see that in Acts 1 through 4, because of Hamlet's innocence stealing and incomplete knowledge of good and evil, he's disillusioned with the earth gone to seed, and he's angry at this heavenly fate, this revelation that's showed it to him and apparently commanded him to fix it. 5. Resolution. Miraculously, most critics agree on one thing about Hamlet's character. You can tell, I was so exhausted. When Hamlet returns from the pirates in Act 5, he's changed. The best way I can describe this change is that Hamlet has accepted his story. He's finally reached a little bit beyond the corruption that's beyond the glitter and paint of seeming, and he's glimpsed a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we will. First, as we see in the graveyard, his reachings have led him to the ultimate end of the knowledge of good and evil, which is death. He fully comprehends that as far as his understanding can reach, all of humanity's seemings, actings, greatness, littleness, end exactly the same, in the dust of death. He cannot know what, if anything, happens after or beyond that, and he doesn't mention, an afterlife at all in this scene. It's that. Macbeth is drowned in despair when he says that life is full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But Hamlet, looking at Yorick's skull and contemplating Caesar and Alexander, and doubtless himself, he seems okay with everyone in the end being converted to a generic memento mori picture of death, right? Because we have with Yorick, he loses his individuality. He's just like a skull. That's this. And of course, even especially back in the day, they would have those memento mori skulls, and it's very generic and all the individuality is stripped. But that image seems to end his despair. And that's why when I occasionally take it upon myself to brush up on and like re-recite that speech about Yorick, I always play it very like I play it very like childlike, or very like almost a delight and kind of ironic humor, but moving into kind of this almost childlike like kind of simple like revelation. And at the end where he says, "Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might patch a wall or stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that earth which kept the world in awe might stop a hole or patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw." And I think of it as this weight going off his shoulders, because all this time he's been obsessing over this one action he's about to take. But here he's like, well, in the end, this is what it comes to. It's not such a big deal. Even somebody who does great things or horrible things will come to the same end. And there's also that image of this little bit of dirt being used to patch a wall, just to keep the wind away and keep the cold out. And that's like a very human action, right? It's a simple thing, and it's like a comforting image to me. And it seems like that's what Hamlet wants to do with his life, or at least what he's been compelled to do with his life, is to patch this one flaw, and to just do this one thing, to get rid of this one piece of corruption in the world. So in that image, I see like just a lot of different things coming together. I love that soliloquy. So yeah, he comes to peace with the end of all of these moral dilemmas, all these events, all these consequences, good or bad, coming back to the earth and dust again. And he's like, okay, cool. Secondly, and then balancing this, he comes to terms with the paradox of providence, or fate, and human will. He no longer rages at his fate. He's no longer gathering evidence or motivation. And along with that, he has found the letter, and that letter kind of solidifies things for him. There's his piece of solid evidence. There's his resolve. Morality or no morality. He's not berating himself for his weakness and failure. He's also not berating others, desperately trying to hold a mirror to their face, asking, have they eyes to see how wicked they are? After exploding at Laertes, he calms down and concludes that, let Hercules himself do what he may, the dog will have his day. Evil will triumph sometimes, and one person cannot fix the systemic evils of the time. Essentially, Hamlet comes to terms with the limits of human judgment and human action. After all this, he admits that no man of aught he leaves knows, and everything he has striven to do has failed spectacularly. In case you didn't grow up on the King James Bible, no person knows anything about what he's leaving behind. Presumably in death, like when you leave it behind, when you're finished, when it's done, you're like, you can't really know what the meaning of it was. And yet there is evidently something beyond Hamlet's mortal mind, and to this Hamlet resigns as utterly beyond his mind. Hamlet hushes his prophetic soul that initially opened him to knowledge beyond its reaches. Now he defies augury. He refuses to torture himself trying to figure everything out. And that inner kind of ethical reserve and panic that kept him from killing Claudius has pretty much melted away. One character is notably absent. The ghost, who brought the poisonous knowledge in the first place, has disappeared for good and is never mentioned, not even when Hamlet, finally performs his charge. It seems that Hamlet's relationship to the knowledge of his father's murder has shifted in some healthier way. The direct contact with this outer spiritual force, which is quite possibly malevolent force, it's gone. There is more separation. We have maybe, providence or fate, the structure of the thing, working behind the scenes, and we have Hamlet acting within his sphere, and there's not this fighting anymore. Overall, Hamlet resigns to the mystery that threads his whole world, from the play's first unanswered question, who's there, to the stubbornly ambiguous ghost, to the myriad terms for fate, providence, heaven, divinity, whatever the nature of reality, Hamlet's world was not designed to be understood in his lifetime. All Hamlet can do is resign, and then he can play what he honestly understands as his part, to see one canker of our nature and get rid of it, so that it does not come in further evil. That's what Hamlet does in Act 5. It's up to interpretation whether he fails entirely, or whether heaven does indeed direct it, as Horatio said, and revenge and chance together restore life to her course, by a destruction of the lives too beastly, and of the lives too hasty, and of the lives too foolish, and of the life too wise, to be altogether on earth at the same time. Conclusion. Intriguing and frustrating as the moral issues of the revenge plot may be, Hamlet runs much deeper than a tale of a man enticed by a ghost to bloodthirst and violence. Because again, that's what a lot of the commentary was about, was kind of on that level of things. That much is very clear. For 400 years, we've been fascinated by Hamlet, and yet we've been unable to define, once and for all, in what consists this fascination, or to define once and for all anything about the play or its protagonist. One perfectly intelligent critic supersedes another, claiming that this time he has the real Hamlet, running contrary to everyone else's blind ideas, and there's never consensus. Clive Staples Lewis has pointed out, evidently Shakespeare crafted his play to produce this effect of ambiguity. He did not want us to be able to pluck the heart out of Hamlet's mystery. Kind of the point. One power of Hamlet is that somehow, in its melodrama and its acting, it mirrors our own life in this world. And we can't quite pluck the heart out of life's mystery either. The character of Hamlet, whatever else he may be, gives us a beautiful archetype of fallen humanity, playing out he plays out his life between earth and heaven and hell, striving to fathom it using a reason and passion that is, in Christian terms, glorious in God's image but crippled by the fall. However you want to put that. Yeah. Lewis says, Hamlet's true hero is man, haunted man. I'm going to wokeify this. Hamlet's true hero is humanity, haunted humanity. Humanity with its mind on the frontier of two worlds, unable either quite to reject or quite to admit the supernatural, struggling to get something done, as we have struggled from the beginning, yet incapable of achievement because of our inability to understand either ourselves or our fellows or the real quality of the universe which has produced us. Now, other people in the play ignore and paint over these deeper questions beyond the appearances, but as Hamlet's world is consistently mysterious, Hamlet is consistently piercing through the seeming to the ugly heart. And again, like in this play, um, mostly through Acts 1 through 4, certainly, it only brings him to that kind of knowledge of good and evil that strips bare the corruption of creation and of himself, but leaves him still lost in the mortal earth's pestilent congregation of vapors. He strips back, all the beauty to see the ugliness, and there's that's where he stops, kind of. But then at the end of the play, he does find this kind of peace by, oh yeah, I quoted that one verse about being wise concerning good and simple concerning evil, and it's like, well, Hamlet's the opposite. Then at the end of the play, he finds kind of peace by being just like simple concerning everything. He faintly connects to some kind of thing. Again, there is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we will. And he resigns himself to that mystery. He resigns himself to the world's disease, and he resigns himself to an action which, as he sees it, might go toward curbing that disease. Yeah. While we remain crawling between earth and heaven, Hamlet eloquently mirrors the glory, degradation, and profound mystery of the human condition. Yeah, very surprising how well that's held up. Pretty sure that my thing is gonna pause if I try to get to this poem. Ooh. Okay, I'm gonna look it up on my phone, because my phone computer is really annoying. My computer camera is really annoying. So this is a poem that I was just reading. It's tangential. It's kind of related. 90 North by Randall Jarrell. Quite the name. At home, in my flannel gown, like a bear to its flow, I clambered to bed. Up the globe's impossible sides I sailed all night, till at last, with my black beard, my furs, and my dogs, I stood at the northern pole. There, in the childish night, my companions lay frozen, the stiff furs knocked at my starveling throat, and I gave my great sigh. The flakes came huddling. Were they really my end? In the darkness I turned to my rest. Here the flag snaps in the glare and silence of the unbroken ice. I stand here. The dogs bark. My beard is black, and I stare at the North Pole. And now what? Why, go back. Turn as I please, my step is to the south. The world, my world, spins on this final point of cold and wretchedness. All lines, all winds end in this whirlpool I at last discover. And it is meaningless. In the child's bed after the night's voyage, in that warm world where people work and suffer for the end that crowns the pain, in that cloud cuckoo land I reached my north, and it had meaning. Here, at the actual pole of my existence, where all that I have done is meaningless, where I die or live by accident alone, where, living or dying, I am still alone. Here, where north, the night, the burg of death crowd me out of the ignorant darkness, I see at last that all the knowledge I wrung from the darkness, that the darkness flung me, is worthless as ignorance. Nothing comes from nothing, the darkness from the darkness. Pain comes from the darkness, and we call it wisdom. It is pain.